In 1893, an entire Roman city appeared out of nowhere on the shore of Lake Michigan. Less than 3 years later, every building was gone. A whole corner of the internet says that is impossible, that the buildings were already there, dug out of a buried civilization called Tartaria, and that the fair was a cover-up.
Everything is in focus, it seems bizarre for anybody who's worked with old cameras.
This is a chocolate concession stand. Why in the world would you need a building that looks like this to sell snacks? That feels very weird. I understand that. If this feels wrong to you too, I get it. For years, I've believed the Tartaria theory. I actually used to be convinced of this very dramatic, very Hollywood, thriller kind of conspiracy theory. But now I'm really not so sure about this. So I spent a few weeks finding out what the historical record really shows. And Dylan has firsthand experience with movie set production just like this.
I have a background in Hollywood. I actually spent a month on a scale Vatican City. Everything you're looking at is foam.
I went through the archive of over 700 construction photos, engineering journals from that time, and whatever else I could find, comparing all of it against the claims made in one of the most popular books in the Tartaria genre. They're really saying founded means found dead. They're making that claim, yes.
Schizophrenic, etymology on steroids.
I was wrong, and I want to not be wrong anymore.
Yeah, I feel like this is a therapy session for you, and I do charge $80 an hour.
Does the Tartaria theory of everything actually hold up? Let's find out. All right, everybody, welcome back to Inner World. Today, we are going to be talking about the Tartarian theory of everything. Basically, the question we're asking is, what can we really know about this time period, the Gilded Age, where the world's fairs were happening, these giant expos? The thing that we deal with almost every episode is problems with the mainstream historical narratives. Usually we focus on way far back, antiquity stuff. But actually in the truth or conspiracy podcast space, trust me bro type stuff, the most popular of all historical revisionism content over the last few years has definitely been way more recent in history. And that's the weird amalgamation of compounded theories collectively known as Tartaria or the Mud Flood or the World's Fair were fake. It's hard to put a label on it. We're just going to kind of call it the Tartaria group of theories. There are some basic ideas that unify the channels who've been promoting this idea, and they go something like this. There was an advanced civilization that built Greco-Roman style architecture all around the world, including in North America, and it was called Tartaria. At some point in the past 300 years, there was some kind of cataclysm that brought about mud floods, which is the liquefaction of the ground that happens during earthquakes, a real phenomenon. And this fully or partially buried a lot of the architecture and essentially reset civilization, according to the theories and the claim. Afterwards, a group of survivors who had access to technologies that other survivors couldn't remake, or they just didn't know about anymore, or they didn't have it anymore. These elites, they made themselves elites, and they began rebuilding society with the secret, suppressed technology. They kept the knowledge of the previous advanced civilization to themselves, and at the same time, they started unearthing some of these buried cities to reuse. Under the narrative, they spread the narrative that these things were being built for the first time. And that's where the World's Fairs comes in. Anyone who remembered the old world, according to the theorists, they were either unalived or sent to insane asylums. As the new civilization, the America that we know of, began to grow and expand, they needed to keep covering up the origins of their Greco-Roman government buildings and stuff. So this became more urgent as people were spreading out across the country. So in the mid-1800s, these elite controllers instituted the World's Expo, World's Fairs, and here's where they pretended to quickly build all of these buildings as infrastructure for the fairs. They told everyone that they were only temporary structures and then destroyed them after using the expos to seed the fake history of America that they wanted the people to believe. Interestingly enough, exposition, like the Columbian exposition in writing terminology, that's when an author quickly and kind of inelegantly, clumsily dumps a whole bunch of explanation about their world on the audience all at once. It's kind of like where they tell instead of show in storytelling. That's a no-no. And anyway, there's another part of this conspiracy framework that the Civil War and maybe the War of 1812 was actually intended or engineered to burn down many of these old high technology cities so that the evidence of the prior civilization could be destroyed. That is a lot of stuff, right? I gave that explanation pretty much from memory because I actually used to be convinced, or at least somewhat convinced, of this very dramatic, very Hollywood thriller kind of conspiracy theory. I've done shows about it. Back in 2021 is kind of when I talked more about it, maybe 2022. I've referenced it since then. But now I'm really not so sure about this. I've done some deeper research to show you guys. I wanted to double check what I've been told about this. And so we're asking the question today, did the world's fairs act as expositions to create a unified historical, cultural narrative for the American people? We can actually say yes about that. No doubt they were used to do that. Were many of those narratives like agenda-driven, untrue, or strange with the world's fairs, the things that they were, the kind of mythology they were putting on the people? Totally. But as for the question about the fairs being comprised of already existing old buildings that were dug out of the ground or repurposed, refurbished, and whatnot, and then demolished, that is the thing that I want to challenge today. And I want to also thank a listener named Tani, who brought this all to my attention with photographic evidence, and we'll be looking at all of this very publicly available stuff. So I want to give a little more introduction. Then I'm going to kick it to Dylan. There were actual problems with the fairs. I'm not denying that in terms of, a propaganda intent behind what was happening there. And I think the factor of propaganda alone could easily justify the great expense and effort that was put into them. And you just look at what is spent on Hollywood movies in our day and age for an example of what elites or social engineers are willing to spend on propaganda. And also the Chicago Columbian Exposition itself, the one we're going to focus on today from 1893, was named and held in celebration on the date that it was of Columbus's discovery of the New World 400 years prior. I think that's a historical falsehood, but most people at that time, just like now, think that that is true. And I think it's probably the case that a lot of the shared mythos of America and the history of America, that patriotic history, we just had the 250th birthday of the country. The expos were designed to impart this kind of like shared mythos and collectivize the sort of worldview of America among Americans. And a lot of that mythos was probably untrue. Like I said, agenda-driven narratives that were being shaped. All of that's totally valid. And there's other weird stuff about the fairs. I'm not throwing everything out. So I don't want you to think I just accept mainstream history at face value. We're going to talk about that. But one last note up front. Me and Dylan, our personalities, especially when we get together, we might tend a little bit towards kind of being derisive, maybe a little mockery sometimes. I really want to just make it clear that when we look at this subject and we talk about lazy research, the potential implications of grifting or deceivers, don't take it as being about you, especially regular people in the audience. Unless you are actively putting out lazy research and intentionally deceiving people, something you're selling is a lie and you're still doing it, okay, then maybe you're the one we're mocking. But I want it to be clear, I fell for this stuff, like pretty totally. And the time it took me to falsify the claims that we're going to look at today, it was a pretty substantial amount of time. I've been working on this for weeks. Most people don't have the spare time to do this, which is why we're helping you out. We're doing it for you, but also thoroughly showing our work. And in my post about this, you can find all of the links to all of the publicly available historical archive. So you can follow along and not just take my word for it. If you are someone currently invested in this Tartaria narrative, please just keep watching this breakdown. I would like to know what I'm missing. If you think my conclusions are incorrect, let me know in the comments. If there's something really, really weird that I just don't bring up at all about it that you think is a strong enough thing ammunition wise to discredit all the rest of what I do show evidence for, then, by all means. So I'm going to bring up some pictures here. Dylan, I'm sure you got some stuff to add to what I just started out laying out here.
Yeah, for sure. So I apologize for not showing myself to the audience. I'm like been sick for a week. I'm kind of burned out and I just didn't have it in me to set up today. So I'm here just in voice, but this was a subject that I never bit on, mainly because I never really saw any cohesiveness to the theory. And I don't even know what the theory or claims are. The claims just seemed really emotional with a lot of presumptions and stuff like, there's no way they could have built this. There's no way they could have done this. There's no way, yada, yada, yada. And the thing for me is I have a background in Hollywood. So, a decade before Tartaria conspiracy theories came out and the World's Fairs are impossible to build. Well, I actually spent a month on a scale Vatican City set called Angels and Demons in 2008. And I saw how they were able to build a whole city to scale, Vatican City. And everything you're looking at is foam that Chance is showing. Nothing of that is cement of the sort. People carrying around, tossing those statues around. And it's like this in the movie industry too, like in Hollywood with like war movies. You think those guys or those extras and stuff are running around with real weapons that weigh, 20, 30 pounds? They wouldn't be able to do that. It would take too much out of them and they'd lose their gusto in trying to make it look realistic and all the actors would be tired. So they have props and they're really lightweight material. So Hollywood's been doing this for a really long time. And that's why the World's Fair thing never
Here's
bothered
baby
me.
Dylan, by the way. He's right there behind Tom Hanks.
So
off
I
his
was
right
probably,
shoulder.
what was that? I must have been like 25 right there. So all I'm saying is that sensational stuff never mattered to me because I've seen how, I already knew how like it could be replicated. But even if it were real statues, they have pulley systems. And I come from a family that my dad created statues. So any of you who live in Newport, Rhode Island over the last like 30 years, 40 years, you will have seen a statue place right off the Newport Bridge in town. As you get off the bridge and go towards town right before the graveyards, you'll see all those statues that one of my dad's best friends, Arthur, made. My dad used to work with him. So I grew up with how those statues are made. The real work comes from making the mold. And that's where the artisanry is. And then you just pour the cement or whatever material you want into the mold. It dries and you have a perfect statue. And then you might have to sand it down or whatever to like any like impure textures on it, whatever. So that I never bid on that. That I know how that's done and I know how fast it can be done. The other thing is that for some reason, this topic came out of nowhere and was all the rage, and like it was like its own self-inducing attention grift. And I don't know if it's a psyop created by anybody special that wanted to distract, but it seemed like it just came out of nowhere. People realized they could get clicks and attention on it, so they just kept running with it.
Well, and it blew up when Cooties was going down. Got to think about that, right?
Really? I thought it was before that.
I mean, I think it had come around before that, but when like it started getting pushed by the algorithm and becoming huge was like 2020, 2021.
And I also remember it was kind of linked to the star forts and all this other stuff. The thing about the Tartaria,
it's all encompassing.
Well, the problem with all of this is that the Empire of Tartary, they're like, look, it's on this map. Yeah, from like the 1800s and, maybe a little earlier. But Tartary in itself is a Greco-Roman word, which is problematic because Tartaria literally means the land or country of Tartaros, which is hell, darkness, abyss, winter, whatever you want to insert your allegory there. So if you're dealing with a mythological component, Tartaros is winter, hell, right? Hades, if you will. And so there's a that in itself is bizarre, but I'm not saying there is no
I figured it's kind of like calling a big chunk of unknown land Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Darkness, black.
Yeah. And so in addition to that, the Empire of Tartary, if you believe it's real, and so let's say it is, and I'm not here to deny or confirm because it was never really in my wheelhouse. It's only from the Middle Ages. It's like the 1300s or something like that. So for me, I was looking at the ancient world, and I even showed how, like, if you just look at the so-called language of that region, it's basically a derivative of Turkic. So it's Indo-European adjacent. It has that affinity. In the ancient languages of Italy and the actual empire that I'm talking about with my work, they have nothing to do with each other. But what was weird is anytime I tried to talk about my work, all I would get is these crazy comments about Tartary. And it was just like,
and I think
why are
we
you...
need to more thoroughly go at that in a future episode because that is the umbrella that all this is under. But for the case that we're going to make today, because, in the interest of being thorough, I wanted to get into all of these things at once, but in the interest of being thorough, it ended up being that I needed to just narrow down on the one event that is sort of the main event that is talked about, right? That would be the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, 1893. Here's like the most iconic photo of it, which is pretty awesome looking, actually. Now, it
looks weird to me. Like, it looks like that could have things superimposed on it. Like, it doesn't look like a real photo. And I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying there's something about that looks weird.
There are actually cases where photos get some things added to them later. Like, for example, if a photographer was not very skilled or didn't have the equipment and they wanted to get a shot of an area, like a good building shot, they would take a picture that's longer exposure, and then they would draw on the negative like little people as if they were really there, like trying to fake an action shot. I think that was something.
Well, that's what those two towers in the left. Do you see those two towers in the left? They kind of look like that.
I don't know. We have a lot, like, I feel like this photo checks out.
Everything is in focus, it seems bizarre for anybody who's worked with old cameras. It just seems bizarre.
Well, that's in the latter half of this, we're going to get into exactly that question. I've done some extremely technical investigation about that, because that's one of the big parts of the argument. But let's stay kind of in order and get to what we get to when we get to it. This is crazy, though. I mean, this is an enormous city unto itself. This map, you can see how giant this is. That's the Lake Michigan, I believe, is this big waterway. This Ferris wheel is 80 meters tall. That's almost a football field high, which is pretty unbelievable.
By the way, back then, a lot of these are built with wood, and then there's just facades on all the buildings.
Yeah,
and
we're going to get into
what
the
led to
construction
skyscrapers and steel, because the reality is all these wooden things burn down and decay and rot or whatever. So that's what led to like the skyscraper type stuff.
Yeah, I mean, also, I understand the question people ask about this. The main question is, how did they build it all so quickly? And that creates this general, when you look at what's here and you don't know anything about building, it feels very impossible. There's a general sense of that. At first glance, like you would say,
could you tell the audience and me, because I'm ignorant right now. I haven't seen this in I feel like this was a decade ago.
I mean,
what is the claim? What is the claim about how long it took to build?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. The claim is that they built, if we go back to this photo of all of this 700-acre area, the claim is that it was built in approximately 2 years, a little over, not quite 3 years, which is nuts. But we're going to address this. How is that possible? And also, I thought this was a really good example of how you would feel kind of incredulous, because you look at a building that looks like this and you say, this is a chocolate concession stand. Why in the world would you need a building that looks like this to sell snacks? Like that feels very weird. I
Well, go
understand
back
that.
to that Hollywood set. It's almost the same thing.
It's exactly that. So the fact that there's this exaggerated grandeur and then we're told that it was destroyed after it was done being used, there is, I understand this intuitive feeling. There's got to be some kind of criminality here. Why would they destroy something so amazing? If they really built it, how did they build it so quickly? What was the propaganda they wanted to seed in our ancestors? Valid question. And what really happened in history? All good questions. So this investigation, I'm really going to try not to mock anybody who used to believe or currently does believe in the mud flood Tartaria World's Fair constellation of conspiracies in some form. All we can actually do is take things one piece at a time anyway. So we can't fully debunk such a big grand sweeping idea that includes many fairs, many cities, many centuries, but we can pull the thread and start to look at things critically in a way that other channels who have built audiences and reputations on this theory, they either can't do or they won't do. And that's what we're here for. We're specifically focusing on the Chicago Columbian Expo of 1893, the abundant photographic evidence of the event, along with the written records that also exist. This particular World's Fair is a cornerstone. I mean, like absolute pillar in the theory of Tartaria being a worldwide advanced civilization being covered up by the elites to conceal our true history. And the idea, I think, originates from, as we already brought up, the old maps labeling big swaths of territory as Tartaria. And why was this done? What did it mean? Is that a cover-up of some kind? I think we should explore that in a future episode, but I couldn't get there in this episode. Apart from saying I don't know that there's a there, like that it's a cover-up of some kind. But, we're not going to talk about that itself this time. We're going to focus on one fair and get really granular and make sure that the claims that are made about this fair are true or false. What is falsifiable.
I think you did a good job writing it, but just for me to get some more clarity, and I know if I'm struggling with it, other people might be, or I'm just like uniquely retarded, and that's fine too. But can you tell me the significance of the mud flood in relationship to the Tartaria Empire?
Yes, thank you. So they will see things like places where buildings are half buried on the first floor, where there's like half a window and street level is covering part of a window, things like that of old buildings, right? Or they'll see like what looks like weathering or dirt stains on a wall that goes up a certain height. And they'll say, look, this is proof that this was partially buried in dirt and it was dug out. Now, that's another set of claims to deal with. But at least in the context of Chicago, which is one of the places where this idea is attached to, and they say especially that the mud flood buried the buildings that you're seeing in this picture, and they were unburied for this fair and then destroyed. There's actually records in the Chicago historical record that they, and other cities have done this too, where they intentionally have raised the, like, I don't know, what's the word for it? They've raised the floor of like street level. They've raised street level higher, like brought dirt in. And so buildings that were already there, the first floor possibly can get partially underground because they're trying to do some kind of leveling out to help with city planning. That's another set of theories to deal with.
And that's very common back then because people need to remember that roads were dirt and stuff, horses and buggies and all that other stuff. The other thing is, like, I'm from a place where it periodically floods from hurricanes and stuff. And so that could leave residue. But one of the things, the reason I never really bit on the mud floods is when I was reading all these old counts of, especially of like the stones and stuff in on the British Isles and all that. Well, something else that happens that people in the conspiracy theories spaces don't ever acknowledge regarding this, which is a lot of these places are also where animals are taken to pasture, and their scat turns into soil, thus raising the earth. So like there's a lot of ancient stone sites that appear to have been buried like they appear to be like half buried or whatever because the animals graze, they defecate, that turns into soil, and it just builds up over the time. And that was talked about all the way in like the 1800s, 1700s. I don't understand why that's like such a hard concept for people. It's like they've just never seen anything from a historical world. It's like it was just completely caught up in current day mindset with a sensational topic.
I can also, though, I will say, when you look at modern architecture, which is so cheap and like looks really, I don't know, degraded in terms of the amount of energy put into durability or ornamentation. It's lacking the mythological gravitas that makes government buildings and the Greco-Roman styles
it's
of
ugly
architecture.
as fuck.
It's ugly. Yeah, I know. So the old stuff felt so elevated. And many of the photographs from the dawn of photography, essentially, to the early or 20th century, they do feel uncanny or anomalous in some way. And that comes from partially not understanding photography of that era. And maybe there's fake photos from that era. I'm not going to say there aren't. But at the end of the day, after we examine and address these two issues in particular, the how do they build it and anomalous photos, I think that we're going to see that these big aspects of the theory, at least as far as the World's Fair in Chicago goes, it doesn't hold up. And we're going to walk you through why it doesn't hold up. Okay, we're going to look at it through the eyes of an investigator. That way, whenever you next come across this stuff, you might have a better way to look at it for yourself. You might have a better understanding how to look at it for yourself.
Yeah, and for all of you who disagree with Chance's work here, go ahead and comment. Be as get crazy.
Yeah.
Post all your craziest evidence that you can in his comments, and he'll go through it.
If you have real evidence, I want to see it. I do. Yeah, absolutely. This is pretty cool. It's like, I can't remember the full statement. There's more words around this little dome, but essentially in Latin, it's like Benjamin Franklin he grabbed lightning from the heavens, or stole lightning from the heavens, is the so this is part of the seeding of mythology, right? I mean, Ben Franklin is essentially a mythological figure, and all the founding fathers, probably a lot of what it's told to us about their character and their actions is highly exaggerated. You can see though, there's building photos here for sure. And so in the last work that we did, kind of debunking, it was interesting. I got contacted by an actual Etruscologist, and I had a conversation with him on the phone. And when I was talking about some of the things that we had umbrage with in terms of the mainstream view about Etruscan history and culture and stuff like that, in the language especially, he kept asking, well, who says that? Who says that? And so it became clear to me, I think, in terms of an academic analysis of a thing or a thorough refutation, it's probably best practice to actually refute somebody specific, a specific work that is representative of the whole. And so we're going to do that. It's no hate against a certain person, but I looked at this topic years ago because I had an interview with this guy, Howdy McCoskey. He was a very popular figure in the conspiracy truther space at that time. And he has a book. It's somewhere on one of my bookshelves. I'm not going to go looking for it, but because I have a PDF of it too. I read his book. It's called Exposing the Expositions. And it's like Ancient Rome in America, I think is the subtitle. I found it super compelling and interesting at the time, just like a lot of other people. However, later on, a few years later, he wrote a book called Exiting the Cave. And at that point, I had a lot more doubts about his other work, just because this book I knew for sure was not my cup of tea. Exiting the Cave, which I also interviewed him about, by the way, these are all up on my channel. That book was all about Plato's allegory of the cave and taking it literally, and sort of the whole inviting the reader to take up the pop Gnosticism thing of reality is an illusion, your life force is being harvested by interdimensional archonic beings, God is actually the devil or the demiurge. All of that stuff, like don't go into the light when you die. If you reincarnate, your soul is trapped, right? Like very defeatist, nihilistic type of philosophy. I'm 100% not into. It's all unfalsifiable, so it's not really something to get into. I mean, maybe it is in a philosophical sense, but it's not in a forensics investigation sense. So my point being, that was at that point I was ready to start questioning other work that I had accepted from this particular author. And so we are looking at claims made by this book exposing the expositions specifically. And I think it's because a useful one to do because it's pretty much a representation of the entire genre. Like a lot of the same things are what everyone says in this space of this particular conspiracy theory. I like a good conspiracy theory, by the way, if it's real. I'm definitely not afraid of some real conspiracies.
I'm not opposed to the ideas of it, right? But like the way they behaved was very kind of reminds me of like religious cults. You know, there was a fervor to it, a zealotry, and that's what I don't like.
Zealotry.
Hey, I think he's blew past some photos. But you know that, do you see that one that's like says labeled the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, evidently a packed house?
Yeah.
Would it be too much to bring that up?
No, it's right over here.
Like, does that not look weird to you, man? Like, yes, the things that give it credibility are the blurred people, but that building on the right, like it looks like the thing's been put through a filter or something, or it just doesn't look real. It looks like that's like I don't know how to explain it, but it looks like most of those buildings are like drawn or some shit. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
I mean, black and white photography brings a whole nother level of divorcing from realism. And also, I did find out about cameras from the time that could feasibly take a picture like this. It's not fully in focus. But yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing that feels uncanny.
The next two underneath it, and that's black and white, and it has so much different, like with the one with the gondola, you know, that looks real. You can see the clouds, you know, it just looks way better. I don't know. There's just something about that one that the packed house just does not sit well with me. It looks like, I don't know. Looks like it was put through a filter or something. I don't know. Just looks weird.
So, and I will say this is not a World's Fair photo itself. I don't think. I think I actually.
But it's just like the city during that time, right?
Yeah. And this is not from this photo was not from the archive of all of the Chicago World's Fair photos. It's so hard to keep track of all your work, but I'm going to admit right now, I don't have the specific provenance for this photo. This is not one that I analyzed deeply. But I get what you mean. I see the uncanny feeling of especially the buildings, right? But there were a lot of different kinds of cameras available at this time, and that's what gets lost on people. Here is a bunch of materials just laying out, ready to be used. They often, like this is a claim made in Howdy's book that there's no materials in the photographs. Like you can't, how did they build it? There's no.
Well, there goes that.
Yeah.
And for everyone knows, like a lot of these cranes and pulleys, well, what do you think they're made out of? Wood. So they're not going to just stay, you know what I mean? Maybe there's some steel components.
Cool stuff made with this staff that we're going to talk about, which is a type of plaster.
Now, is that a wood carving? That looks like a carving my dad would do on wood.
That is not wood. No, they make a big mold and then they pour this plaster in it. It's kind of like plaster of Paris mixed with a little bit of hemp.
Gotcha.
And,
but it's made with wood. It's carved. They make then they pour
No. It's clay that they make the mold out of. There's wood is only to like frame stuff according to the.
But how would you know that right there? How would you prove to anybody besides what it's claimed to be that that's actually what it is and not just a wood piece that's been carved? Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, on a case by case basis.
Like there is so much faith involved with. There's so many. It's kind of like a lot of the problems that we've had with other subjects is same with the religious and same with the other artifacts. There's so many claims that are jumping to point C without showing how they got there from point B and then from point A, you know?
Well, one thing that we can point to in terms of context for this photo, it's not like, perfect proof, but this picture is one of about 700 images that were taken by a dude named Charles Dudley Arnold, C.D. Arnold. He was a photographer born in Ontario. He moved to Buffalo, New York, and he became a professional photographer in, I want to say, somewhere in the 1880s, early 1880s maybe. And he ended up being the official photographer for the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. This is the dude who documented basically every detail of the construction and the fair when it was going on. So we actually have an archive of photos all from the same guy, allegedly, that when you look at other photos in this same archive, you can see the process of, I didn't focus a whole lot on the sculptures, but they're, I have links
I
to
would
these
love
archives.
to see the photos of them making the sculptures, not the finished product. But the other thing that I love about this photo is it literally looks like what an average actor sees on a Warner Brother lot or Fox Studios when you go into set. Like, it's literally, what do you mean you can't build that in a couple of days? It takes 20 guys, you frame that shit up, it's ready to go.
Exactly. And they had, for Chicago, they had 40,000 people working. That's a lot of 40,000. That is a huge workforce.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And Chicago, keep in mind too, Chicago was like the central hub for the railroads of that era. So getting people there, not only did it have a big population to draw on, but getting workers, skilled laborers to Chicago for this job was totally feasible and doing it quickly. So, and they had an incredible budget. We'll talk about the budgeting. So, okay, the thing about Arnold, the photographer, I don't know if there's a whole lot more we need to say about him other than that's who you look for. C.D. Arnold photo records. I've got tons of links to everything in here. All this stuff is online, and we'll just say that's where these photos are coming from. Pretty much all of them that we're going to show from here. There's a lot of channels who promote World's Fair, Tartaria cover-up theory. And so we're just going to, again, focus on the exposing the expositions, who's a really good representative of the movement as a whole. I'm going to stress again, too, the situation with the expos is legitimately strange. It's totally over the top. The conspiratorial evidence or explanations can seem very plausible for people who don't have the time to invest in serious research. And I don't think McCoskey was the origin of this stuff. He was just a central figure in the whole scene, getting momentum, and his book pretty much covers the whole theory and all the analog theories. So not picking on him out of spite or hate. It's just a good book to hold up as a example of the thing.
And we don't know who, like, what if it came out that some of these people later on say, yeah, like, we literally just did that because it was getting so much attention. So it was just a way of making more money. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I would actually have a lot of respect for somebody if they came out and said that.
You can also find the episode where I talked to Howdy about this in 2021. It has a really dumb title because I thought I'm evading the censors. So it's Howdy, John. How would you fare building a city in one day is the title. That's linked in the Substack article.
Isn't it wild? The other thing I wanted to address is with that mud flood stuff, another good example of sediment buildup is the statues on Easter Island. If you've ever seen them, how some of those are like way underground, right? But you see how the sediment builds up.
Oh, you know, it's something I didn't put in my notes that's worth mentioning. Howdy McCoskey episodes where I've talked to him are the highest view count of anything on my channel history. That's something to keep in mind too. So this is somebody that is not algorithmically suppressed. I don't think the archons are trying to keep him from getting his message out there. He's like, at least of all the things I've ever done, I've talked to so many people, his stuff has the most reach. So, you know, I'm not trying to attack the guy, but also I'm putting that out there as a, you know, like I'm not attached to staying, I don't know, buddy with his material just because it was good for my reach.
I will also say this, it is a pattern. It's not the sole reason, but almost everybody who's had him as a guest, I no longer regularly listen to. Right? Because it's like you have too many like guests that make these crazy claims and don't back it up. It's just like, well, if you're not going to do the work and filter it out, then I can't trust you as a podcaster.
Yeah. And this is another one of those episodes where the whole reason I'm starting it is because I was wrong. I was wrong, and I want to not be wrong anymore.
Yeah, I feel like this is a therapy session for you. And I do charge $80 an hour, but the good news is I take payments in cheesecake, good Italian food. Like, we can barter for this.
Oh, I didn't put these photos up. Check these out. There's a couple more I got. They're like, they had entire quarters that were to imitate different places of the world, like high culture. So
But
this
doesn't
was
that
like
look
an
like a
Italian
facade to you? Like, is there anybody that looks at that and goes, "Oh, that's solid stone
Yeah,
crafting"?
the people invested in the Tartaria mud flood theory will probably say that. Although they'll backtrack and say, well, let me just explain. Let me explain. Because if I go through the structure of Murkowski's book real quick, it will help you
You're
understand.
starting to sound as crazy as they are just to try to defend them.
I'm not trying to defend it. Listen to this, okay?
I'm just fucking with you.
The book structure, and this is super typical of the whole thing, offers three main scenarios under the main theory, which the main theory being the story of the world's fairs is a lie. Okay, so scenario one that he offers is the dates given to the fairs and their construction are untrue dates. They must have taken 30 to 40 years to build, not 2. Later, he rejects that theory, but he spends a lot of time writing about that theory. Then he throws it out. Theory 2. The fair's infrastructure was built in 2 years, as we're told, but only because the builders used advanced energy technology, atmospheric free energy, stuff like that, which was suppressed. And that's how they did it so fast, as they had advanced tech. Theory number 3. The major buildings were found, not built, and they like to do this sort of wordplay that buildings are said to have been founded, which means found dead. They were found dead and repurposed. Okay? And then that's not my favorite.
Are they really making that claim? Like, that's
yeah,
what the
they're
word
really
founded?
saying founded means
gosh.
found dead. They're
Damn,
making
this
that
is
claim, yes.
like schizophrenic, like etymology on steroids.
Yeah, it's a problem. So they were found dead, not built. They were buried or weathered remnants of an older worldwide civilization. This is the main theory that he tends to support in his work. I say support loosely. The elites simply hired laborers so the buildings could be dug out, refurbished, whitewashed, and presented as new. And there's an afterword that he added to the book in 2021, which I think was like a year or two after it was published, where he gives scenarios 2 and 3 a 50-50 odds of being correct. The free energy suppression and the found dead, those were 50-50, he said. And then the fairs, his fourth speculation, which was the one he was really wanting to put into the afterword, because I think it was the one he really most believes, is that the world's fairs were simply written into the reality simulation by our archonic overlords to seed the historical data needed for a believable reality simulation that only really began in the 1800s. Yeah, they call this, actually, there's a term for this in philosophy that's kind of like a joke called last Thursdayism. The universe actually only began last Thursday, but we don't know that because it was created with all of the history in place to seem as if it was older. But actually, the universe just started last Thursday.
It reminds me of a meme I saw the other day where it's like, there's no guarantee that you're going to reincarnate in the future. Your ass might get sent back a couple thousand. You know what I mean? Like, it's like all that shit.
Okay, so throughout the text, he's regularly retreating to some kind of version of, I have no answers, only that the main story of the fairs is a lie. I don't know the answer. I just know that they're lying to us. In the terminology of logical fallacies, this is called a motte and bailey. That is a metaphor relating to, I have it here in the picture, medieval castles, their layout, where the bailey was a large courtyard where the main buildings of farming and commerce took place, and it was a very highly desirable but difficult position to defend. The motte was a steep artificial hill or a mound of some kind topped with a tower. Not really worth much by itself, but impenetrable, more or less. Like you could hole up there if you had food, they're not getting in unless they could knock it down. So the Mott and Bailey fallacy is when somebody conflates a really extreme and controversial, outrageous claim, that's the Bailey, hard to defend, with a modest and very easy to agree with, universally agreeable claim, which is the Mott, the tower. McCoskey, in this book, he's repeatedly advancing to the Bailey, making a claim like the fairs used pre-existing buildings, suppressed technology. It's a matrix simulation. Pick your pick your Bailey. And then he retreats back to the Mott. All we know is that the narrative must be a lie. So the reason this is a logical fallacy is after somebody successfully defends the Mott, they act as though they have actually defended the Bailey. They conflate the hard, crazy, extreme claim with the easy claim. So they'll put it forward and then they backtrack to the easy claim. Like as soon as you start to challenge them, they're like, "Oh, but we know they're lying. I don't know the truth. We just know they're lying." I'm like, "Yeah,
well, let me ask you something.
Of course, they're lying. We know lies are all the time. History is not really understood."
If he or anybody taking this position, let's say they said something about the buildings not being but if they could actually show evidence of why they're making that claim, even though they could say like, "Hey, I don't know how the magic trick is done, but I know this right here is not real, or this right here is the distraction or the illusion, whatever." If they can prove a portion of that, then that's not the Mott and Bailey fallacy, right? As long as they can prove because I'm just going to say, for me, I can't always say I know what happened, but I know what didn't happen. You know what I mean? Is that a logical fallacy if I can prove that, you know what I mean?
Well, Dylan, the difference here is that you might speculate. There's nothing wrong with speculation, but you don't try to hold that position as if it's absolute when you don't have a good defense for it.
Gotcha.
So what the Mott and Bailey is that they have no defense for the extreme claim, but because the less extreme claim is easy to defend, they act as if the extreme claim has been defended. You see what I mean?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not I don't think this is categorized in the main list of logical fallacies, but it's a cool
Just
one.
because I don't want people to be scared of, not that they would be scared, but you know what I mean? I don't want people to be like, "Oh, then I better not say that I think someone's lying," or I you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you know something's off in the buttermilk, as they say.
Look, the thing about logical fallacies is none of us are innocent of making them, right? They're easy ways that we slip into trying to justify our desire for something. You know what I mean? We all slip into these sometimes. It's actually
Correct.
What's useful about knowing them is if you know them categorically, it's easier to catch yourself in them. And that's really good.
Yeah, it's a way of self-correcting.
Let me know when I do a Mott and Bailey. I'm sure I've done it in my life. So, okay. The thing is, it would be total overkill and take forever to attack every claim made in the book, exposing the expositions. And also, when you read the book with scrutiny, the book refutes itself over and over again, unfortunately. Let me give a little example. In chapter 3, you can find it, he states that no blueprints survive for any of the fair buildings at the Chicago Fair. He makes that statement evidence for the theory that the buildings must have already existed. In the bibliography of his own book, he lists a plan book called Handy's Plans and Diagrams of All Exhibit Buildings in the World Columbian Exposition. And here is a sample. Okay? These are called blueprints. These are plans. This is an entire book of these. All right? So he says there's no blueprints for any fair building. And in his own bibliography, he puts a book of plans and blueprints. That's what we're dealing with here. I'm surprised that it was actually even in the bibliography. It's just, see what I mean? This is why I call it lazy research. What do you think? Non-existent blueprints.
Honestly, man, it's almost like you're pulling. It's like, are you jerking my pizzle?
So I bring this one point up because it's such a huge one, but there's other examples like this. We're cherry picking and misinterpreting evidence. And
by the way, I love the font. I love that old font. It's the best.
I don't want to hate on this one guy. Okay, he's not unique in this. This is a thing that's really common with truther content, and I want people to be able to start sniffing it out. Myself included, because I'm sure there's other stuff I've taken as gospel where it's this level of contradictory to itself. And it's not just him that does this in this particular genre either. So I already brought up, but algorithms don't suppress this genre. And maybe it's because it's a red herring and it's not dangerous to the establishment. We will see. But now
yeah, especially because, I didn't see anybody going to Congress and telling YouTube to censor things about Tartaria. But there's other subjects regarding the nature of Earth, things that actually matter, that they have expressly gone to Congress and made YouTube censor these topics. Okay? Stuff that is demonstrable. So that's a huge problem, why things are allowed to succeed and things are not allowed to succeed. And what you see is that everything is so curated. And I'm saying this as in the audience, you watching right now have no idea how curated everything is. To the point where one of the reasons I loved that last episode you did, what was his name again, that gentleman?
Chris Crutchfield,
right? You see, I've always told people long ago, the biggest problem with Hollywood is I can't tell where the government ends and Hollywood begins. And you see that where, how are these people getting money? Well, they're being funded. You see this in the gaming industry. All these studios have been able to stay in business for decades sometimes, creating flop after flop after commercial flop, yet they still always have money, and it's because they're getting funded by taxpayer dollars from the government to push agendas.
Right, and that's why
everything is like that.
Same thing with the World's Fairs. It doesn't need to be profitable even. It can be really expensive. So, okay, we're going to get into what I'm calling pillar number 1, load-bearing pillar of the whole World's Fair Tartaria argument. And that is that the construction was impossible, physically impossible to build. The Chicago 1893 Columbian Exposition was said to have been built in 28 months, so a little over 2 years. This is a 690-acre city, essentially, built in that time frame with a bunch of alteration to the landscape that had to happen to make it possible. Totally wild achievement if it's true. McCoskey's book also brings up the St. Louis World's Fair. I did a lot of digging into that one too, but it's just not going to fit in one episode. I found basically the same evidence chain and trail that a lot of the sources that give you Chicago evidence also give you St. Louis evidence. They were very close together. That was called the Louisiana Purchase Exposition.
Well, I think if you enjoy doing this, it's worth going over, because
I think I might continue.
It's helping making clarity. You know what I mean? Because
yeah,
it's helping.
Also, it's cool to look
these people are
when
thinking.
We start looking at what they actually did. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's awesome.
It's impressive. So this is the timeline for the Chicago Fair. It was 1890 that Chicago is chosen as a host city for the Columbian Exposition, and then there's a company called Olmsted and Company appointed to shape the landscape plan in late 1890. That's where they basically changed the entire layout of the area called Jackson Park. 1891, the photographer Charles Dudley Arnold starts photographing the construction. 1891 to 1892, they're working on grading the land, changing the elevation and level of the ground, lagoon excavation, putting in foundations, bringing in railroad tracks so that they can have materials brought. Major buildings are starting to get built. 1892, they hold a dedication ceremony in late 1892. A lot of the principal buildings are now up and standing. And then in May of the next year, 1893, the fair opens to the public. It's open from May to October 30th. They close for winter essentially, and then it's over. And then Chicago winters get really cold, so I understand why they wouldn't keep it going through the winter. And then in 1894, they start demolishing the temporary buildings. Some of them are salvaged, some of them are burned. Most of these buildings were said to have been this staff plaster over steel or timber frames, mostly timber, actually, as it turns out. And so the first thing people are going to say is like, you went through all that effort and it was only open for 6 months and then you destroyed it. To that, I would say staff. The claim is that the staff, the plaster they used for these buildings, it does tend to degrade pretty quickly. And so my guess is that over the winter, it was in a lot worse shape than it was before the winter. Chicago winters get very harsh. So that's just my guess. That makes sense to me. But the onset 5 years ago, looking at this stuff, I was like, no way. They just destroyed it. Now, here is what McCoskey in the book says about the impossible to build claim. He cites an authority that gives him credibility on his claim that it was impossible. That authority is an anonymous, never named building contractor friend who estimated that modern machines, these would take 10 to 15 years to build. It would take 2 years alone for the plans and 2 to 3 years to do the landscaping. So that's what the building contractor friend had to say. When I was talking to my mom about this, and she's in the business world, she was like, I think it's because they didn't have all this safety protocols and red tape. Like they could just get stuff done.
Yeah, right?
Right? Like imagine trying to do this today. It probably would be impossible to do in 2 years because of red tape.
You're going to need a permit for that.
There's so many more layers of middlemen at that point. It's crazy.
I mean, you can't even build the Palisades the way the Palisades were just burned down. The pre-fires, the Palisades that burned down a couple years ago, because the building permits have changed so much, the regulations, the building codes.
Wow. I don't actually know anything about that. I've been totally in this. I've been in a tunnel focusing on this. I haven't heard the news. But let's get into this set of photos here, okay? There's construction photographs, and I'm going to show you. This is the site of what became called the agricultural building. This is October 6th, 1891. As you can see, there must be some kind of like foundation dug a bit, and there's some timber going up. But there's no building here, all right? This is not a building being dug out that already was there. Now we go jump forward to March of the next year. So like 5 months later? And you see the steel and timber frame, a lot of steel there. And then we jump forward. This is just a couple weeks later. They have now managed to start putting some of this staff on the outside.
What about records of manufacture for steel? Are there any record? Like that would be interesting if you get some receipts on like who made the steel and all that stuff.
Well, I have receipts on the shipping of it, but there's probably more there's probably some receipts on a lot of this stuff. I found enough receipts that I was satisfied. I'll say that. I'll show you. I'm going to show you those. We're going to get to that. So now we're going forward just a couple more weeks. This is a bigger shot. We can see some incomplete, some complete. Now here's a shot from July. So this is like from April 23rd to July 16th. We have a lot more complete looking building here. And then now jump forward to this is during the fair. So done. According to the photographic
awesome
corpus.
Though. It's so cool.
It's so cool, right? Like, wow. But you see the whole process, right? This is not being dug out of the ground. Yeah, unless we just say that these photos are a lie. But I don't know.
Yeah, like if they were like models or something, like so the like super
so much
like
effort
some Star Wars, like because I could see that happening, like where the people in the foreground are real, but then in the background they've superimposed them before like the models that they've built, like Lord of the Rings type shit.
So the Tartaria people, their videos, they'll show you mostly completed structures wrapped in scaffolding. Like they will show you these kind of photos a lot. And
but let me ask you something.
Well,
I'm sorry to keep interrupting.
They say that completed structures wrapped in scaffolding photos are explained as being evidence that these were weathered pre-existing buildings and they're just getting painted and refurbished. They'll point out there's no evidence of material stockpiles, no tools, no food or sanitation infrastructure. And I don't really ever see much food, but you do see tools. You do see materials in a lot of photos. And so anyway, I want to make it clear I'm not showing you all 700 photos that this Arnold guy took, but you can go look at them yourself. The Art Institute of Chicago has the best archive of it, easy to flip through. I just wanted to show you this one because it shows the whole process of a specific building from start to finish. Okay.
So you partly answered my question, because my concern was what do they think these buildings are made out of? Did they say that?
They're saying these are like,
are they saying
marble,
granite?
stone, granite buildings,
okay,
like carved.
Okay, perfect. Because this is how you whittle them into checkmate. Where in America were these granite, marble, limestone, whatever it is, where were they quarried?
That is not a question that is answered by McCoskey's book.
Because if I talk about the best granite in the United
technology.
States...
It's just advanced technology.
Yeah, well, if I talk about the best granite in the United States, which is why there's so many imported Italian stonemasons in this country used to build all the cathedrals, well, guess where we can go right and find that quarry? It's called Westerly, Rhode Island, dipshits out there. Now, you go do that with this. So let's say these were old buildings and they just renovated them or whatever the hell you think. At some point, those old buildings would have had to been constructed. What is the material and where did they quarry that material? And if you can't provide that evidence, then you've got a serious problem. Now, if you can provide that evidence, we're on to something.
I think at this point, it's time to retreat to the Mott. We may be wrong about the whole dugout and refurbish, but we know they're lying about the story, Dylan.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I see with that. I can now see that, but it's like, that's where my mind, all you have to do is provide stuff like that. And I'm like, all right, well, look, this has got some legs. Let's keep going, you know?
So about the Arnold corpus of photos, it's linked in the article, easy to Google search. I even looked into the history of this archive itself. The digital collection was online by 2009. And the other documentation, publication records, and all that show that the photos themselves were being rolled out in the museum collection from 1989 to 1993. So unless that's all been doctored and covered up too, these photos were definitely available public archive material far before the Tartaria theory happened, right? So if anyone wanted to make the claim that, oh, they just created these photos after people figured out Tartaria to try to disprove it, that is not supported by the evidence that we were able to see. So also, if you go look in that archive yourself, you will see a very systematic progress in Chicago from the dredging of Jackson Park all the way through to opening day. You can see them pile driving. You can see them erecting the iron and steel truss work. You can see the casting shops for the plaster. You can see the materials yards, the dedicated construction rail spurs for the bringing it in. And the book of McCoskey's totally ignores this evidence or tries to explain it away as fake photography or simulation editing of the simulation. All right, so specific quote, page 47, he wrote, "There were no roads or trucks for bringing in materials." If you look in the historical record, you find out Jackson Park was chosen for this fair specifically because the Illinois Central Railroad was right next to it, and they could just run short temporary train tracks to the fairground, okay? Also, if we're going to say these photos are fake in some way, this is something that's really important, all right? There are periodicals from the time, Scientific American, Harper's Weekly, Engineering News, and more, and I found all of these, where there's copies of these, physical copies in libraries all over the world, even outside of the United States. So if we're going to claim that there's, I know this is a drawing, right? But you have... maybe I should have got a screenshot that shows more photography in the magazine, the print magazines. But I went through sorry, I'm screwing up my slides. I went through a bunch of these magazines and found that there's so much record, including photographic record, of the fairs and the building process that, again, if there was a retroactive forgery job done to fake this in a more modern sense, they would have had to edit every physical copy across continents. So we either have to admit that this is real, a real photographic archive, or turn to the unfalsifiable explanation like simulation theory or Mandela effect. At that point, if you fall back to that, I think you lose the argument, right?
For sure. Hey, can you go right back to that picture that you were just at, the real picture? Yeah. So is that a river? Or is that like, what is that? What's that water? Or is that just a man-made like body of water?
This is one of the cool parts we're going to talk about. And
before I forget, the only reason I'm bringing it up, Chance, is like the idea that there's no roads but it's like, well, are there ferries? Because that's how a lot of people got around back then.
Well, there weren't cars yet anyway, but there were definitely rail spurs, they're called, like tracks that come up and then you go back the other way. They're not like round trips. And they're right next to the main hub of railroads for the whole country. So one of the things I'm bringing up with showing some of these, and we're going to talk about what you just asked, like the water there and the dredging and the grading of the land, because that's some really cool stuff, actually. Really amazing stuff.
But that's not a river? That's not a river?
No, it's not a river.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's man-made waterways, which is even cooler. So this is from Scientific American. I have the screenshot of it here, but it's going to be hard to read on the picture. I just want to show you. These exist. You can find these on public record, scanned copies of these. I went through a lot of them trying to find evidence that the fairs really happened and were built as explained, and I found tons and tons of evidence. I'm just going to showing you a sampling. This is a quote. The inaugural exercises proper. Gosh, I just butchered that again. The inaugural exercises proper were arranged to take place in the great Manufacturers and Liberal Arts building, shown in the accompanying illustration, and in which 100,000 people could be readily accommodated. It is the largest exposition building ever constructed, covering nearly 31 acres of ground. To get it ready in time for the opening exercises was a vast undertaking and has required many weeks of high-pressure service on the part of the various heads of construction department with their army of assistants. But the business was so thoroughly organized that there has been at no time any possibility of failure. And this is only one of a great number of large buildings, nearly all of which are now approaching completion, whose construction has been carried on so rapidly that they seem to have almost sprung out of the ground as if by magic. But there will be nothing cheap or unsubstantial in the appearance of the structures which have arisen in such a marvelously short span of time, for their staff coatings will give them the appearance of stonework of great solidity, combining the highest architectural effects with the most artistic representations of the sculptor's art. So here, Scientific American is explaining to you, they really got it done really fast. And another thing that is said in this article, where the author says they were carried on so rapidly that they seem to have almost sprung out of the ground as if by magic. One thing that McCoskey's book does all the time is he will highlight quotes like this. Another guy that was involved in the management of this process, or somebody writing about it, said that the buildings were erected as if risen by a fairy's wand or something. Basically magic, So he'll point out quotes like this and be like, they're telling you in code that this was advanced technology. It's a coded message. I'm like, no, that's just how authors talk. It's just hyperbole, right? Like there's nothing, we shouldn't take that as a coded message. Am I wrong about this?
Yeah, I think it's I honestly, and I'm not, this is not about him, so we don't need to talk about him.
No, it's not about him.
I just think a lot of people in here, when they come up with these things, I just wonder how much cannabis do they smoke, because it seems like there's like this paranoia, like
I smoked a
slash
lot of
delusion.
cannabis back when I believed this. There could be a connection.
I just
I'm no
wonder,
longer a smoker.
like, I just wonder if there's some sort of relationship that's going on with use of narcotics and like other things that like makes you paranoid, and I don't know. And the only reason I'm saying that, I'm not trying to insult anybody. I just think like the problem
It's like,
with
whoa,
these
dude, when you're
subjects,
high.
yeah, is it makes everybody else look bad. So if you don't come with a clear state of mind and are articulate and actually provide evidence to back up your claim, you're then ruining it. It's like the boy who cried wolf, because then when someone else who does have serious things to talk about, everyone else is going to be like, oh, not this shit again. You know what I mean? And that's what's so scary about this stuff.
So here are some screenshots from an entry from September 1st, 1892 of a periodical called Engineering News. And they're writing all about the manufacturer's building that the Scientific American also wrote about. Keep in mind, at the time that they built this, it was not only the largest structure at the fair, this was actually the biggest building in the world at that time, which is pretty sweet. Engineering News, this periodical, gives a ton of details about the cost of materials, the mathematics of the engineering, including load-bearing capacities of various structural elements, and they put in diagrams and blueprints too. I am definitely no contractor like McCoskey's contractor friend, but to me, this looks very convincing that the build really did happen as we're told. And again, to fake these records, you'd have to go fake actual physical copies of these periodicals that are in more than one place. This was a mass printed
I got to
thing.
overrule. If you're not going to provide a name of somebody, you do not get to admit that as evidence.
I know, but
my friend's grandpa's cousin's specialist said so. No. Strike that from the record. It's not admissible. I don't want to hear about it.
Okay, I just brought it up because that's his main, that's how he frames it.
This is how we need to approach this. We need to approach this with like a legal mindset of what we actually are willing to entertain. If you can't stamp your name and reputation on the line for that claim, I don't care. You can't. It's not admissible.
So I'm going to read a little quote from this page. The central structure is of steel, talking about the manufacturer's building, and the surrounding part of timber construction with combination roof trusses. The roofs will be covered with corrugated iron and provided with ample skylight area. The exterior covering and decorative work is of staff, a cement plaster which has already been described in our columns, and is used for all the main buildings on account of the rapidity and cheapness with which it can be made, and the excellent appearance which it gives the finished structure, while it is easily molded into the most elaborate decorative work. The color of the exterior of the building will be a strong ivory, resembling the travertine stone used in Rome. So, okay, I will tell you that section I just read was from the September. Yep. This is from what's on the screen. Okay, I'm just making sure I got that right. I think it can be hard for people. This is a big part of my realization, okay? I think it can be hard for folks to imagine America crushing at this level, okay? The biggest building in the world, building it in 2 years. Our current perspective is completely skewed by generations and generations of cancerous corruption that at the time when this stuff was happening, maybe it had not quite been metastasized to the civilization. What I mean is there was no central bank for the majority of the 19th century, including at the time of the fairs. The decades prior to the Chicago Expo were so prosperous, including the time of the Expo, they literally called this time the Gilded Age. So, maybe this is just America crushing. Is that so hard to believe? Maybe they were just getting it done. Like, I actually, considering it was just America's 250th birthday, I kind of feel good about that. It's hard to imagine now, though, because there's so much wealth siphoning. Everything's got so much middleman red tape garbage to get anything done. But this, in my Substack article, I just want to show you a screen. I put it on the slides too, so you can see. But here are some of the records I found that you can look up, not even all of them, that corroborate the engineering and construction processes of the Chicago World's Fair. So I would be really tedious to read it all, but there are links. I put links to every single one of these that I found, references, engineering explanations, diagrams, costs, shipping records, all of this stuff. Got engineering news, engineering record, Scientific American supplement. I even found articles in a publication called The Dental Register from 1892, which is like a magazine for dentists. And in this, they gave specific numbers on the carloads of construction materials arriving at Jackson Park each day on the train. So when you hear a claim that there were no roads or trucks for bringing in materials, we're ignoring the fact that there were train tracks run to the expo site and they were bringing in raw materials by the ton every day. Okay, so in the Dental Register, I don't have the screenshot. It's just a little piece of text. It's in my article. It specifically says 35 to 40 carloads of material arriving every day. Okay, so if you're going back and faking the records, why would you fake it in some dental register? I think we just need to throw out the faked records, right? It's so extensive. The records of this are so extensive that it's time to accept that this really happened and look more closely at the technicals of how it happened. These buildings were not masonry. They were timber and some steel. They were basically, imagine like a shed that's like a really cheaply constructed backyard shed. That's essentially all they were. They only used the steel when they really needed it for structural integrity. And then they used plaster of Paris. It's called staff, but it's like a plaster with cement and hemp fiber. That is the part that they really heavily dispute in the Tartaria because I think it's not very well understood. So let's get into the technical briefing here.
Real quick, before we go to the second hour or for whatever, do you have the ability to bring up a Google search so people can see you do it live, or is that too much?
Sure.
Could you do that? And this is all live because you just said Gilded Age. I come from a town where I spent the majority of my youth called Newport, Rhode Island. I want you to type in Breakers, Breakers Mansion, Newport, Rhode Island. Perfect. And just look at this. This is I am from an Irish town. I have personally been in these. Go to the image search. You can see how magnificent. I have been all throughout these. And these are built by the Irish in the Gilded Age. That's why there's so many Irish here. They were brought in as skilled labor. I've personally been in all of these for the most part. And this is just one out of a bunch of mansions. If you want to get specific, you just type in Newport mansions and you'll see all the different ones. They are magnificent to a degree that you cannot imagine. And it cost back then, that was owned by the Vanderbilts. So if you want to know who they were controlled the railroads, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and that railroad system eventually became Amtrak. And the descendant of that empire or that family is Anderson Cooper. That house cost $3 million back then when an ounce of a dollar was still, an ounce of silver. So just to give people an idea of what people were capable of building in that time period. And guess what that was? Those are just summer homes, baby. Fucking nothing to them. Rich families from New York building that as their summer home.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that amount of wealth. So crazy.
You can't until you see it up close. These are the kind of people that were
funding. Those were the kind of people that were funding these fairs to happen too. So it's a legitimate question to ask. Why did they want this to happen? What were they trying to do with it? And propaganda is a obvious possibility. Maybe there's something in terms of governments making programs so that they can create work and help stimulate the economy. That could be part of it too, because it was a huge effort that brought a lot of work to a lot of people. That could be part of it. Now let's talk about how the fairs were actually built. All right. Let me just be straight. The archival evidence and the technical evidence does not support the claims that some or most of the main buildings were mysterious pre-existing advanced technology. Does not compute. we're going to focus on the Chicago Expo here, still staying on that. The Tartaria camp likes to point out something that is very hard to believe about the expo there, which is that the area of Jackson Park is described as low and swampy ground, and it had to be reshaped. And we're talking about 690 some odd acres, almost 700 acres. They take this as evidence that maybe they didn't dredge a swamp, but they instead dug out a mud-flooded old city. Okay, let me read from Olmsted, the Olmsted Network. Olmsted and Company was appointed, this is a company that still exists, in 1890 to transform this 600-acre swampy and desolate site. They dug earth out of the existing lagoon system and placed it over adjacent low areas to build up banks, terraces, and grades. This redistribution of earth allowed them to shape waterways that mimicked cities like Venice. That sounds really incredible.
That was the first thing I thought of. Remember when you showed that foundation where the pillars were in the earth? That's what I thought of.
Venice. They did that. They really did this. And I think that sounds super hard to believe, especially remember we're told that like they planned it and got it done really quick. What I found when I looked into this Olmsted company that still exists is that they were originally familiar with the site for this project for 20 entire years before they did it, because the Chicago South Park Commission in 1871, 20 years before, asked them to provide plans to turn Jackson Park, the swamp there, into a park in that exact area. The plan to do this was interrupted by the Great Chicago Fire. But finding this out, I was like, oh, it's kind of reasonable then to assume that they had done a lot of the planning already to figure out how they were going to deal with this giant landscaping issue, right? Like if they already were very familiar with the area, maybe it's not so hard to believe that they had a plan and hit the ground running as soon as they got the green light in 1890. So to talk about this process a little more, let me see. Yeah, I think I need to just explain it. They were essentially taking like soil out of what were going to become waterways and channels and moving it to other areas to make flat land and higher elevation land. So they weren't like moving the earth super far. They were moving earth from over here to over here. And that sounds like a lot of work, but they had tens of thousands of guys potentially to do it, at least for the whole,
But that's been going on since ancient Etruria, where they ritually destroyed cities, buried them. You know what I mean? This is something that people have been doing in Europe forever.
Okay, so it's actually within the realm of plausibility that they would do what they did. And why they chose to do it there, being close to the railroad, is a good location. It's right on the water of Lake Michigan as well. I'm pretty sure it's Lake Michigan. I'm saying that from memory. I looked at the 1892 official guide to the grounds and building of the World's Columbian Exposition during construction. It's a mouthful, but this is an official book.
What about this? Let me ask you this real quick, because that water means... So people are like, how did they move some of these materials? That's been some of the things, like when they're like, oh, they only had horses and buggies and stuff. But like, it's like, but if they have that water, then it's likely that they built barges. So that could have had a utility, the water, to ship, to like move the materials to each side of the city or whatever.
Right. They're bringing it in on rail cars, and then they could potentially float, smaller shipments of materials to where they needed to go for that day. It's all possible, especially without the red tape of modern times. The more I think about that, the more, and the safety regulations and the overtime requirements and stuff, like they could have had these guys working from children dawn to dark.
You ever see those like 12-year-olds smoking cigarettes and shit in like the early 1900s?
Child labor and the whole nine. Yeah, absolutely. They were just getting it done. So here we're looking at what became the Palace of Fine Arts. Okay. And according to the official guide to the grounds and building of the exposition during construction, this is a book I have linked from. It's an 1892 book. They would sell it at the fair to they were showing off what they did. This fine arts building alone, and this was different. Most of the buildings did not use brick. I'll explain why. 13 million bricks in one building. 13 million. 1,359,000 pounds of structural iron. 3 million feet of lumber. These numbers sound really crazy, but they actually check out to the size and scope of the building. This building is over 500,000 square feet. It is the only building that remains from the Chicago Expo. It has been heavily renovated. Let me show you. This is it today. It is the Museum of Fine Arts now, or it's a Griffin Museum of, I want to say like Science and Industry. I think that's what it is. The Museum of Science and Industry now. I have it labeled here.
Are the pillars still the same? Like, it would be interesting if you could compare just to see, like, the tops, just to see if that's all the same design, or because what I'm saying is, like, somebody could look at a pillar there and be like, oh, this is stone. See, it's ancient, but they might have built it, in the renovation.
Let me show. There's a photo that is in my Substack, but it didn't make it into my PowerPoint. So let me slide that in real quick, because this is a super important photo, and there's other photos like it. Copy, paste. Why aren't you working? Okay, we're going to do this different. We're going to ditch.
And by the way, the pillars, it's not that I'm not saying they're easy to make, but like there's still a process for erecting pillars. It's not like they're just one long stone, Okay, I was just curious because I'm looking at this. Okay, right there, it looks like those are the same pillars.
What they did is in 1930, so 30 some odd years after, almost 40 years after the fair, and keep in mind, this building was mostly brick. It didn't use as much staff. And staff can be kept up if it's repainted over and over again, is what they say. And the lower parts of the building, they would use more concrete in the staff, stuff like that. But they removed the staff and entirely replaced all of the temporary building materials in 1930 with limestone. And this is all detailed. I found a really good article from a newspaper called the Hyde Park Herald, where they explain the process of renovating that brought them from that partially temporary. And they always intended for this to be a more permanent building. So this was like a plan for it, and they just got around to it when necessity occurred, I suppose.
That's awesome that you were this well prepared, because that could have been a slippery slope where if I had asked that question, you're like, yeah, I don't know.
No, yeah, I specifically picked out this building because this is the type of thing where they say, these buildings pre-existed.
But to be fair, I don't
know.
Look,
it's limestone.
We don't know, or I'm saying I don't know, because I'm just going to speak for myself. I don't know that those pillars in that photo are the same pillars that, like, I was wondering if you had a photo of it.
This is why I was trying to get it back into my slideshow, and I'm having trouble doing that live.
What it looked like at the fair versus modern day versus that photo we just saw.
And this is the kind of thing I totally encourage anyone who wants to check my work to do 100% if they care to, So I don't think we're looking at the same part of the building per se in these two photos, but you can see the style of the column and that like design above the columns. We're looking at what I think is the same building.
Right. But what I'm saying is, in that photo on the right, I don't know that that's the same building as what was at the World's Fair. That's why I'm wondering if you have a photo of this building during the time of the World's Fair, because right now what you're showing me is not necessarily the building is that the building, or is that the swapping out for limestone? That's what I was curious about.
On the right is the swapping out for limestone.
Okay, so
let me find you.
In that context, that might have been like that photo right there. Some of it may have already been swapped out, which is, I want to see like what those pillars look like on the actual time of the Renaissance Fair to see if they were the same types of pillars. And, and maybe they are. And that's part of the permanency of it. I was just curious.
I think
it doesn't prove anything one way or another.
Were staff and had to be replaced. But here's a photo. Yeah, this is from when the fair was going on. Let's see if I can just plop it right on here.
And the only reason I'm asking is because, yeah, that looks like they're the same style pillars. So that is impressive. That would be one of the things where like it's like, okay, it looks like they use real material, like serious materials for that. Like that's not like a foam facade. You know what I mean? Like if that's the
Yeah.
real limestone, like they actually went through that process.
And I don't know specifically what parts were already brick and what parts got replaced with limestone.
And by the way,
But
the only reason I'm bringing that up is that adds legitimacy to some of the Tartaria people concerned. I'm sorry to identify them as that. I don't know what to call them, but like
the
that at least
Tartaria people.
gives legitimacy to their concerns. Like, how did they do that so quickly?
Yeah. Well, when I was first exposed to the whole theory, I was totally in awe of the scope of how big this cover up must have been and the amount of work it must have taken to pull off the cover up. When you really just think about it that way, like, holy shit, that would be really tough to actually
I think
cover
the
up.
real cover up is like how the process of building like that is not so widely known anymore because everything's changed with like how, with machinery, technology,
Well, yeah,
cheaper
that's now that
material.
I've really looked at the real historical record, I'm even more in awe than I was about a cover up, just about the ability and work ethic of our not too distant ancestors. Right?
Exactly.
Like that's what's incredible. And that's part of if there's a conspiracy about the conspiracy being a popularized conspiracy, maybe it's a demoralization about what America is and could and once was and could be, Could be something about that. This is the book called The Official Guide to the Grounds and Buildings of the World's Columbia Exposition. Okay? And it tells you things like you see the subheader here, construction and cost, materials used in the building. It says the material used was staff, 30,000 tons or 2,000 carloads of staff was consumed. It was invented in France about 1876, so it was kind of a new technology. It was first used in the buildings of the Paris Exposition in 1878. It's composed of powdered gypsum, alumina, glycerin, and dextrine. Those are mixed with water without heat, cast in molds in any desired shape, and allowed to harden. The natural color is a murky white, but other colors are produced by external washes rather than additional ingredients, aka they mostly paint it. And, it goes on the next page telling you more about how the staff worked and what they did with it. It's, again, they were using hemp fiber as well. That's part of what is described. Now let's talk about the
Well,
budget.
real quick, sorry to
Sure.
keep harping on this.
Oh, you're good.
So do you think, like, is it saying that those pillars are staff or are those pillars actual, like, serious stone that would hold up?
I don't know the answer to that.
It'd be interesting. Somebody wants to go if
my guess is that the pillars were staff on the exterior, and then they were later when it was renovated, they were brought in limestone and replaced them. But I don't know. I really don't know the specifics about each little part of the building. It's a very big
that's
building.
just one of those things, and I'm sorry to keep harping on it, but that is
You're
just
fine.
one of those things that if it's authentic from the very get-go, it just lends a little bit more credibility to the suspicions, That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that it was dug out, that it already existed.
Just plain devil's advocate.
Now, that's good. I want that. I want that. So, if you can see how they're talking about expenses in this article, and it says right here, the Paris Exposition cost about $9,500,000. That's in 1870s, so that's even crazier. A relative idea of expense may be obtained when it is understood that the outlay for the Chicago Exposition, including administration and all of their expenses, will probably be $26 million to $30 million. In addition to this, there were perhaps $3 million to $4 million spent by the general government, foreign countries, and the various states for their own buildings and exhibits contained therein. So what ended up, okay, it says also,
just so everyone knows, that $9 million in 1870 or whatever is about 230 plus million today.
Well, I did the inflation math. What they ended up spending According to other like all the sources I looked at, what I found is that it really ended up costing about 22 million total. In 2026 standards, 22 million in 1893 would be 800 million today, give or take a few million. It's really hard to reckon with numbers that big, right? But for comparison, there
And
was a
that's not
movie in
digital units on a screen either. Like today's
that's
money. That's
that's
like
worth gold.
legit fucking resources being exchanged.
Yeah, it's true. Now, in fiat terms, the 2022 movie called Jurassic World, it cost, adjusted for inflation, I think, 659 million. That's the most expensive movie I could find budget-wise. So compare, like, they've made a movie that wasn't even good, that no one cares, and spent almost as much money as that, adjusted for inflation. So it is not the craziest budget in the world. Like, that budget sounds reasonable to me, personally, especially in a time where the country was really wealthy. Like, the two of the bad new trilogy Star Wars movies were like over 500 million. And that was in 2015 and 2019, higher with inflation, right? So the price tag is high but plausible. I compare it to Hollywood because a lot of this is just like Hollywood movie sets. They were basically built for as scenic architecture at civic scale, right? Like you showed at the very beginning. The economy and display mattered more than permanency. The impossible timelines theory would ring true if these were solid masonry buildings for assemblies of lumber, iron, steel, glass, molded coating, yada yada, and a workforce of 40,000. It's a much easier story to believe they really did it than the cover-up theory. The cover-up theory is such a massive amount of work and effort required to do the cover-up. You got to weigh those things in the scales. Also, I don't include, but in the photo archive, I don't include in my article, but go look for yourself. There are photos of the demolition process and stuff, and it looks like, to me, I don't see any stone buildings being, stone being broken and carted off. I see wood and steel frames being demolished, right? Which is not that hard to do, actually. It's like knocking down a big shed. Sometimes they burned it. Let's see. We talked about staff pretty well. The guide claims that the staff was lighter than wood. It was fireproof. It was waterproof. It was durable if kept painted, fairly durable. And so how the staff worked is they would create these shells in large sheets for the exterior walls and stuff, and they would just nail it directly to the wood frame. So just think about like a big plaster sheetrock essentially, and they would just nail that on and then paint over it. And also, this is a kind of cool detail. The majestic look of Chicago's White City was completed by paint and electric light. Edison at the time had already commercially viable light bulbs existing for more than a decade. The Art Institute of Chicago records that the director of decoration, I bet he was probably not as fruity as modern, male decorators. Francis D. Millett was his name. He experimented with an air compressor and electric motor device to quickly airbrush these exteriors. So don't imagine like a bunch of guys with paintbrushes hand painting all of these buildings and taking forever. They were spray airbrushing probably pretty quick. So that's cool. There's a record of the technology that allowed for them to paint easily. It says that in the official guide, 17,000 horsepower was allocated for electric lighting. The manufacturer's building alone, the biggest one in the world at the time, used 10,000 electric lights. So that's pretty wild. The Marble City effect, the way it looks like a Roman heyday city, is basically a lighting trick. It's materials and lighting executed at an enormous scale. That might even be why there's this somewhat uncanny feeling to some of the photos. It's like this is not real. These are not real buildings in one sense. They are, movie sets intentionally. They also planned the demolition into the business model. That's something I read about, and they were able to and intended to sell things like steel as scrap because it doesn't really hurt its value that it was used, just be melted down again and whatnot. So that's what I have about the building process itself. The last section is going to be an analysis of the photography. Is there anything you want to add in about the building process that still feels fishy or feels unanswered, Dylan? Or
No,
other
I
thoughts?
like these episodes because in doing a deep dive on this, it has the potential to change my mind if you put out enough information that, like, you know, upsets what my objections have been, or like contradicts what I thought. But so far, all you're doing is confirming to me that it's like the status quo story is more accurate.
Yeah. It might not be perfect, but I definitely feel like part of why folks are gravitating towards this conspiracy theory, or did, the nostalgia factor for a bygone age where things were so like just seemed so awesome and simpler.
And we're better made.
And
Everything wasn't designed to go to shit after a little bit, so you
exactly,
have to
the
rebuy
fact that a lot of things got worse from here definitely could help support the feeling of like, what was there was a crime. What I got to figure out what the crime was. And so the Tartaria theorists are kind of like, they're giving you they're telling you what the crime was, or claiming. I think the crime is central banking. I think there's other crimes involved. Coming up in the members only part 2 of this episode, there's one major claim we haven't touched yet, and it's one that Tartaria theory leans on for a lot of its support.
Everything is in focus, it seems bizarre for anybody who's worked with old cameras.
Flags look sharp, people are frozen mid-stride, and Tartaria theorists often say 1890s cameras couldn't do this, so the photos have something to do with the cover-up. It turns out there were fast handheld cameras in this time period, so I came up with a way to test the feasibility verdict on each image, using a measurable calibration card in the photos and the physics math of lenses and exposure time. At first I was like, why are they putting this in here? And then I realized this is a QP card, and that is a common modern photography calibration tool. Every time you shrink the size of the pinhole for light to come through, doubles the exposure time. This applies to DSLRs and these crazy emulsion plate style photos of the late 1800s. It's the same concept. I have a background as a professional architectural photographer. In part 2, we put several so-called impossible photos on trial. The full forensic breakdown is there for members on InnerversePlus.com. Come and see whether or not they hold up. I will say in conclusion, it is a tentative conclusion in a sense, because we've only refuted a small fraction of the claims made in this content genre, and specifically by that Exposing the Expositions book. But I'd like to think that now that you've seen how a genuinely comprehensive analysis of a few of these like load-bearing pillars of the conspiracy theory, genuinely deep analysis shows that there's extremely reasonable doubt, if not outright debunking, of those main points, then we should probably be suspicious of the rest of the points in the theory and not just take it for granted. Like, if the impossible build theory and the fake photos pillar of the Tartaria thing are wrong, or demonstrably wrong, we have reason to think that everything else built on those pillars is also wrong. Because remember, you don't actually have to disprove every claim made in a big sweeping set of claims if you can undermine the foundation that it all rests on, right? Like, you don't need to bother disputing astrophysics and dark matter and all that stuff if you can prove that the Earth is flat and stationary. You no longer need to deal in all of those other things built on heliocentrism. What I want to say about Exposing the Expositions, the book itself, and because this is really relevant to us, is the way that McCoskey uses, and other people in this theory, I'm not hating on him, he plays the forgery card regarding the historical record in a certain way, and I want to bring this up.
To like attract audience, like to attract the people that are into that stuff?
Well, it's like this. Whenever a historical archival record, photograph, document, whatever, contradicts his theories, he infers that the record has to have been forged. Fabricated blueprints, fake drawings, date-altered or photoshopped images, all of that. So essentially, he's using forgery, the forgery card, to create a all evidence against my point was manufactured position. In other words, it's basically like
That's fucking hilarious.
Heads I win, tails you lose.
I hope I don't do that. God damn.
Well, this is why I'm bringing it up, because in the way he's using the forgery card, no observation can ever count against his theory, and the absence of evidence gets counted for his theory. Heads I win, tails you lose. Now, me and you have conjectured about forgeries in the historical record more times than I can count, and I want to hope, and I hope I'm correct in saying we do a better job of showing why we have that suspicion, and we don't tend to make a grand and sweeping conclusion based on a maybe.
And we always preface, I'm like anal about this and you know it. We always preface that everything we're looking at could be forgery, and we're trying to make sense of a bunch of nonsense that never happened.
It could very well be. Universe could have been created last Thursday.
I love that. Like, instead of see you next Tuesday, it's see you next Thursday.
It's last Thursdayism. It's a real thing. So I'm sure we've made mistakes. We're not innocent of making mistakes. But on the other hand, this whole World's Fair project was from my need to correct a mistake I made in the past believing in this stuff. So I just want to point that out, because we use the forgery. We look at forgery. We consider forgery, but I don't think we use it in the same heads I win, tails you lose type of way where all evidence against my point must have been manufactured. If it goes against my theory, that is the proof that it's fake. Rather than we prove that it's fake to support a theory, we're saying it has to be fake because it doesn't support my theory. You see the problem with this?
Yeah, we also use the forgery thing as a warning, where it's like, we're citing this source, but the oldest version of it is from the 10th century, but it is claimed to be copies of copy. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a way to kind of just make sure nobody gets too attached to anything. But I just want, like, because this question, this Tartary question's like really like on my mind. So I just typed in Tartarian Empire. There is nothing on Google except conspiracies right away. Like, the AI is like the first thing. It's like Tartary or Tartarian Empire or Tartaria is a popular internet conspiracy theory proposing that a massive technologically advanced global civilization was intentionally erased from modern history. The myth posits that this empire featured free wireless energy and constructed mankind's most beautiful and massive architecture before being destroyed by a mud flood.
Well, okay, I didn't say this, but you want to know the other reason why I got interested in debunking this, if it was possible to debunk, is because the Little Season Bros that we talked about with the Revelation episode, they piggyback onto the Tartaria stuff. Because
is that so?
They do. They say, look at the advanced architecture. These things were built when Jesus was in his time reigning the earth. And then
Jesus
it all got
was
covered.
Gothic and shit.
And then Satan began his little season and covered up all the cool shit Jesus was up to.
Jesus was all up in some steampunk.
Dude, I'm not kidding though. Like, this is real. These two theories are converging. I think that we can wrap it, man. We've been here for a minute.
I'm so glad you did that. Like, I wasn't sure what to think about it, but like, that was a really fun conversation, because I don't really feel like I have any emotional attachment to anything that was talked about. And cool. Like, what's cool about it is, for me, it's like getting the info from a non-emotional standpoint that we can just look at it and say, hey, is there anything to this? What if there is?
If I was going to point a finger, I will point it at pop culture Gnosticism, because as soon as you bring on board the whole belief that reality is an illusion and invisible archons are harvesting your loosh and your body is a prison and you're a slave and all of that stupid stuff, as soon as you take that on board, you'll believe anything as long as it involves you being victimized or wronged. You know, that's because that's the ultimate victim posture.
Like, yo, and enjoy life, you know, like, stop whining about how you're a prisoner and all this other bullshit.
It's just very sad seeming.
Yeah, him, like the Eric Dubase, and I like Eric, but like this, like, I understand why you would think that, because the world does have so much suffering and life's not fair and things don't go your way. Very rarely do things go your way. Life is hard. It's full of challenges. I get all that, but you can still find the beauty in it, and you can still.
Well, your choice is, are those hardships for your benefit, or are they to break you and enslave you? And that is your choice. No one can pick that for you. So no one can refute your pop culture Gnosticism, Archon, Demiurge thing. You have to choose yourself. It's called in philosophy, the ground. The ground of your belief system is 100% chosen. There is no philosophical ground that can be proven or falsified. So
that's why
it's basically pronoia, everything's in your favor, or paranoia, everything's out to hurt me. It's your choice.
I would really encourage, if my audience is listening to this, to go listen to Chance's previous Innerverse episode with what's his name again?
Chris Crutchfield.
Chris. The reason being is because you touched on the fact that you understand why people would think it's a simulation, because everything plagiarizes the systems of nature. But the systems of nature, they have to have some sort of code to them. They have to have some sort of packet of information in a seed that gets planted in the soil and all of a sudden becomes all this stuff and knows how to shed fruit that it knows what other beings like to eat, so it propagates itself even more. Like, there is that element to this world. There's we're not saying that, but the negative spin on that is the most defeatist. It's victim status garbage, and it's like, bro, someone like him who has that much clout, you should be partying like a rock star and fucking loving life, taking advantage of that. You know what I mean?
Or at the very least, just have a normal, chill life and quit trying to bring everyone down to your nihilism.
Yeah, or that too. Yeah, you can.
Yeah. You know, you don't even
obviously,
have to be a rock star.
I just projected a little bit of what I would be doing. Obviously, yeah.
Because, the whole worldview of the Gnostic prison planet would be, whether or not they would say to my face, essentially they're telling me, you did a bad thing by having a daughter. You just enslaved another soul into the Matrix.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. That's
you should
so
not have
wicked.
done that. That was wrong of you. That was messed up. You just signed a torture death warrant for another being. Like, okay, you don't have any kids, clearly. See ya, man. Hey, thanks everyone for watching too. This was a good one. Thank you for listening to Inner World. To unlock the second half of this episode and access the entire archive of our research, join Innerverse Plus or become a supporter on Dylan's Substack. Find links to all the ways you can join at innerverseplus.com.